Hello, and welcome to Pinkskyinspired Conversations with Enid O'Toole and Lucy Ashby. In 2019, having just run a personal best in the Cambridge Half Marathon, Susannah Close was pretty shocked to discover she in fact had advanced stage 3 bowel cancer. She was only 36, fit and healthy, and forced to re-evaluate her life in an instant. In an attempt to organise her own feelings and stop other people facing the same dilemma, she began writing about her experiences, first for True Stories Live, and then in her very own blog, Let's Talk About Poo. During treatment, Suze found that her continued commitment to fitness and exercise had a positive impact on the severity of her chemo side effects, and has since added encouraging other cancer patients to exercise through treatment to her list of aims for the blog and Instagram account, alongside getting people talking openly about poo.
Welcome, Suze. It's so lovely to have you with us today.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Now, obviously, we've talked a little bit amongst ourselves, haven't we, about things that you like about the podcast and things we like about you. So I just thought it would be nice if you could maybe share with people listening and with us what makes you feel inspired, what makes you feel like your best self.
Okay, so I think there are two elements to my answer for this question. So the first element is my intellectual self, and the second is my physical self. And I think both of those feed into my emotional self. So my intellectual self is about thinking and thought. So I feel like my best self when I'm thinking about things. And also I think I feel quite inspired when I engage with other people's thinking. So, I like challenging and reflecting on my own thoughts and ideas. And I think, we've had conversations over Instagram where I've had to do that as well. And I think that's really good. I think it's really good to challenge yourself. And I like processing new ideas and perspectives and discussing them. I really like learning. So I'll always have like 4 books on the go, and some of them will be fiction and some of them will be non-fiction. And I kind of, that keeps me feel pretty inspired and like I'm being positive, I guess, as a human. And then my second element, the physical self, is, we've talked about the exercise, but this completing this physical challenge, so a race or a long bike ride or cracking down a mountain bike trail, those things are really important to me. And I know they don't necessarily sort of level up, because you think about sporty people and you think about sort of intellectual people. Not that I'm saying that I'm an intellectual person, but, people engaged with ideas and learning, they kind of don't always coexist. But I think they actually do. And for me, the physical challenges bring this real awareness of what I can achieve physically, but also then emotionally, because like a physical challenge is really an emotional challenge. It's a mind over matter. Yes. It's training. It's dedication. It's not just about, I can run this distance or I can ride this fast. It's about the mind elements that go into that. And it really, they clear my head. They get those endorphins running, keeps me sane. And, I think it's always about challenging your capabilities and making that space in your head. And I think just one little example I wanted to share is like mountain biking. I'm not very good at it. Put it out there. And the reason I'm not very good at, there's probably lots of reasons I'm not very good about it. I started mountain biking in my mid-30s. I think that's the sort of thing you start when you're a kid. But the reason I'm not very good about it mostly is because I'm a bit of a control freak. So this is that element of emotions and physical. And mountain biking is almost like something you have to meet in the middle with if you're a control freak, because you have to have control so that you don't fall off and die. But you also have to let go. You have to trust in your bike. You have to trust in the engineering of the people who engineered your bike. You have to trust in gravity and momentum, because if you don't, you're going to fall off too. So it's that really nice place for me, although I'm not very good and I'm not very quick. But when I do successfully, complete a run or something, or a an obstacle. That's the word I was looking for. You've had to have let go of a lot of those elements that is very hard to let go of. So for me, I think that makes me feel like my best self when I've done something like that.
Wow. If you follow Suze on Instagram, or you do after this, you'll see just unbelievable evidence of all her daily physical exerts, which make us feel like slugs, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
But in a good way.
Yeah.
That's not my intention.
No. Well, another way of saying it is it's very inspiring.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
I really,
that's my intention.
Thank you. It is so inspiring, and it also looks to me like really playful and fun as well. It was really interesting to hear you talk then about, you know, the physical aspects of activity and the emotional and intellectual aspects of physical challenges. And I was just thinking, yeah, I bet you've had a tough couple of years, and I was thinking this also is something which gives you a different focus, and in some ways a massive, hopefully a distraction from some of the more difficult things that are going on in your life.
Yeah.
It just sounds like a really sort of positive life force kind of attitude to things.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the staying active has been important as well in feeling like I'm getting better, or I'm repairing, or that I'm still, you know, the fact that I can still, even if it's a little, it's not what I used to do, but, you know, I'm getting a lot stronger all the time. And that's that's really helpful in terms of, you know, recovery, I think.
I know that you've just completed some chemo. Is it okay to ask, like, how did it go? How are you feeling now?
Yeah. I feel pretty good. I've been really lucky in that I haven't yet experienced cancer-related fatigue, which is probably one of the biggest long-term side effects of chemo. And I don't have scientific evidence of this, but I really believe that one of the reasons I managed to escape it was because I did stay so active. And because there's different elements of, you know, you've got movement, you've got activity, you've got exercise, and all those things are great, but exercise is quite different because there's a lot more structure to it. You know, it is about having a structured program with aims, to reach. And I think that element for me, has helped battle that fatigue. But I could be wrong. And in saying that, I don't want to say that and then know that there are people out there struggling with fatigue who've tried really hard to stay exercising. Sure. So we're all very different. So that I'm really lucky with that. What I have suffered from is neuropathy, which is the nerve damage to in my hands and feet, basically, which does make running a little bit challenging because I can't really feel the bottom of my feet. Like the way I explain it is like, imagine you're running on a bit of polystyrene. You just had like a slab of polystyrene strapped to both your feet, and then you had to sort of run on top of that. So you can feel it, but you feel like there's a distance between you and the ground. So it does make it a bit scary in terms of undulating surfaces and but you can get into a rhythm and sort of bypass it. But if I was to go from walking to running, so where I struggle is if I'm walking into town and then have to run across the street because I haven't timed it right with the cars, that's when I will feel like, the floor's about to go from underneath me.
Oh gosh, that must be unsettling. Wow.
Yeah, and also just have to remember, it's like, actually, I probably shouldn't run across the road in front of a car.
Yeah.
Those crazy things.
You want a special Suze tip.
Yeah.
Is that something that's hopefully going to recede as you get better?
Hopefully. I think when I first saw my oncologist, he said it was something like 5% of people experienced permanent damage. A lot of the people I've met in cancer land, are still experiencing it sort of 2 years later. That doesn't mean it will never go away, but it does seem to be, 18 months to 2 years seems to be a pretty normal time period to still be experiencing.
Just to experience it.
Yeah. The hand bit is quite weird. My hands get quite sore. And, if I have to reach out, I can't do anything with my hands. Once I've reached out with them, I lose all dexterity, which is a really strange feeling.
Oh, wow.
But
wow,
I
never heard of that. That sounds quite challenging. Yeah,
fun and games. A little bit like electric shocks. Like right now, if I'm pumping my hands outstretched, and I can feel like little electric shocks going through my fingers. It's very not unpleasant, just weird.
Just weird, and makes the function quite impaired. Yeah.
I'm always dropping the shower head on my head because Steve puts it too high, and I can't reach it, and then I have to reach up, and I can't use it, and it's like
Wow, that's really interesting. Thank you. Wow.
So, just on to the next question, I guess, who would you say are 3 people who've been most influential to you?
I have chosen 3 strong and determined women from my life. So my mum and my grandmas. And I think when I first met you, Enid, I told a story about my grandmas at True Stories. So they've been a big part of my life. So my dad's mum is Wizzy, and she is a very determined lady. She's no longer with us. And she nursed her husband through bowel cancer for many years and was left a widow of 4 sons. And I think they would have at that stage been aged between sort of 12 and 17. And then from that point took over successfully her family's sheep farm and took on this really so it was a real man's world then.
Yes, definitely.
And she had such grit and determination. She didn't back down, and she was pretty successful in the farming and breeding world. And then at 83 she trekked across the Australian Alps on horseback. Camping out overnight, riding all day. So, that sort of determination went through her whole life. And she was definitely I actually did a speech about her, I remember, in year 6 for a public speaking competition about my hero. And I chose Wizzy. And I think, I don't think she had the easiest of times. But she never let it get her down. Well, she probably did let it get her down. I was a kid. I didn't know, but she achieved a lot of things despite the odds.
Yeah. Sounds really tenacious. Amazing.
Yeah. Tenacious, I think, is a very good word for my grandma. And then on a completely different sort of spin is my other grandma, my mum's mum, who, it's a less triumphant story, but just as, she had just as much determination. So, although she was quite a difficult woman, and to be fair, probably Wizzy was a bit difficult. Maybe that was part of what made them strong. But she had this amazing ability to show empathy, maybe not always to her family, but to the other people in the world. So she taught me a lot about empathy and thinking about other people. And I think it's even more interesting because she had a pretty rough life. So she was forced to leave school at 14 to care for her mother. So she didn't have, she wasn't seen as the intelligent daughter or the beautiful daughter. So she's like, well, you'll be the one that can stay home and look after your ailing mother. So she lost that chance to have an education. And she's such a bright woman. And I think it's really unfair that she had that taken away from her because she could have done so much. And then when I was a kid and from many years before that, she lived in this high-rise council flat in Redfern, which is a suburb of Sydney, which at the time was pretty notorious for, very high levels of deprivation, violence, drug and alcohol abuse, very high racial tensions. And I'm sure you're aware that Australia has a pretty horrendous human rights records. And it's, really continually failed and abused the First Nations people. And Redfern had a very big First Nations community, which my gran lived within. And it was a very, very racist time. Even me as a kid, I remember people feeling perfectly okay to voice some pretty racist and outrageous opinions. And that was kind of the norm. It was not the norm to stand up to those sorts of statements. And it was definitely, mirrored in the media and lots of things like that. So my gran, having had this pretty sad upbringing, very, very sad marriage. Her husband was an alcoholic. He shot himself. She had no money. She had 3 kids. And I think all those things, she had very high standards and very, but so that made her quite closed off and very difficult. But despite all those horrible, things that had happened to her, she was still able to show so much compassion to the people that she shared her community with. And I think that was quite a striking thing for someone of her generation. And also someone who'd had such a difficult life herself. Because I think sometimes when your life isn't very nice, it is very hard to show empathy to other people.
Yeah.
And she managed to do it, and she managed to teach us that, the status quo that was being bandied about wasn't okay. And she changed, helped us to see everybody as people first and foremost. And I think that was a pretty amazing feat for someone of her sort of upbringing and the challenges that she'd had to overcome. Yeah.
Absolutely.
God, I was getting goosebumpy when you telling me about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We now see you've come from a long line of inspirational women too. So that tells us a lot, doesn't it? It explains a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Susie, you've already shared with us, and we know that you have received a diagnosis of stage 3 bowel cancer. When was that, Sue? 2 years ago?
Last year, September 28th, 2019. So nearly coming up to my 1 year anniversary.
Yeah.
What was the hardest part about receiving that diagnosis, Suze?
I think realizing that I wasn't invincible, and that I really couldn't trust my body anymore. Because it kind of happened to me twice, this sort of loss of faith in my body. So in 2011, I had a series of pulmonary embolisms that were diagnosed very late. I was sent home 3 times from A&E after arriving in a hospital because I didn't fit the risk factors. Pulmonary emboloms are not linked to, people at that stage. I can't remember how old I was in 2011. I guess I was just 30, maybe. I'm not going to try and do maths quickly. And I was quite fit. And I was so fit that my ECG readings were coming back normal because, I was quite active. So I didn't fit the risk factors to make my diagnosis easy. So I felt like my body let me down then. And then yet again, sort of 10 years later, or less than 10 years later, I had the same thing happen again. I was fit. I was running 30 or 40 miles a week. I was very healthy. I ate really well. I definitely got my 5 a day. I didn't smoke. Despite all this, I was diagnosed with advanced bowel cancer. And I think that the irony is that it was almost for the second time my healthy lifestyle that led to the delay in diagnosis. Because I was fit, because I was healthy, because I was young, I didn't fit the risk factors. So the diagnosis wasn't made, the dots weren't connected early enough. So it's very hard, I think, sometimes to trust your body because you sort of feel like, well, you've let me down and I've tried really hard to be good to you.
Yes, I can understand. You've done like all the right things, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is part of you. Yeah, so there's part of you that goes, well, that's it. I'm going to start smoking. I'm going to not worry about how much I drink.
Sod it. I might as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
I can really understand.
For breakfast.
Yes, as many carbs as I can possibly fit in. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, is that something that is a big part of your blog and your campaign that you're trying to emphasise to people that they need to be more mindful about their bodies and about their poo?
Yes.
And well, you say it better than I do. Talk us through that.
Well, I think poo is taboo, isn't it? We don't talk about poo And even you notice it in little kids, about 2 or 3, or, you know, when they're around time to potty train, they realize they should be embarrassed about poo. They take themselves off into a quiet corner to have a poo. My niece, you know, she's little niece. I remember her doing that, but I also remember having an accident, and she was so mortified, and she was, you know, like just speaking, and she's like, I'm sorry, mummy. And it's just so unfair, because it's like, it's okay. Shit happens.
Yeah, literally.
And
yes, I love that. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I think if we drop the taboo and we accepted that everybody poos, everybody farts, it's just how our body works, and we talked about it more, because bowel cancer is now, I think, the 3rd killer in this country, and rising, and more people under 50 are being diagnosed with bowel cancer. So we need to get over it, and we need to talk about it, and we need to work out what is and isn't normal, because I think a lot of people put up with an uncomfortable life because you don't talk about it. And if you go to the doctor, you get an IBS diagnosis, which is very vague, you know.
Is that what was your... Is that literally what happened to you, Suze? They kept saying, oh, it's a bit of tummy trouble, you've got IBS.
Yes.
And that repeatedly happened.
Yeah, exactly. And I was also very anemic, but they didn't link the anemia and the IBS symptoms, because I just wasn't in the category to be looking out for, to have been looked out for.
So it just didn't sort of flag up. And then presumably you became much more unwell, you were in more pain, and then eventually...
Yeah, I got to the stage where my life was pretty much ruled by my digestive system. You know, I couldn't eat anything without pain. I was going to the toilet 12, 15 times a day. I was taking iron tablets and Imodium to be able to run. I had to stop going to my running club because I was too embarrassed, because I had to run off in search of toilets so often. So it did escalate to a point where it was sort of unbearable. But I was also resigned to the fact that this was going to be my life. I just had to learn a way to manage it and to put up with it.
So you would advise other people if you're experiencing symptoms like that, and I know that you've put some things on your page and on your blog as well. You know, if they're experiencing things like that, to be persistent in trying to get help.
Yeah. I mean, and just ask for a fecal test. Because I think that was the one, if they just sent me for a fecal test earlier, that would have been enough to flag, because if that came back positive, if that would flag, then you automatically meet the criteria to get sent for a colonoscopy. And a fecal test costs nothing compared to major surgery and 6 months of chemo or worse, you know.
Worse,
yeah.
And the problem with people under 50, we're getting diagnosed too late. So by the time we get diagnosed, the cancer is already quite advanced in most cases. And if it's early, you can catch it and you can have it out at colonoscopy level, you know, at that instance. And then that would save a lot of heartache and money.
Yeah. Thank you, Suze. Yeah, it's so helpful to hear about that for us and for everybody listening, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Kind of running into my next question, and it's kind of based on the fact that as we go through life, dependent on our circumstances, we all tend to learn from our failings and as well as, you know, all the positive things in life. And I almost hate to ask you this question because you are really so inspirational. Just sitting here, just listening to you is just, you know, I honestly, I feel like, oh man, I need to get out and run.
We need to do more, Enid.
I'm not just from the person chasing me down the road. I mean, literally.
Or for the next tube of Smarties.
Or for the next tube of Smarties, you know.
Whatever motivates you.
Smarties do. So, so, I mean, but, you know, following the fact that I truly believe that we learn from, you know, the positive things in our life as well as the negative things in our life, what would you say was perhaps your biggest failure or something that or something like that you've learnt from? What did you learn from that?
So I think it's quite funny because I listened to your last podcast with Faye, and her answer to this question is ridiculously similar to the answer that I was thinking of giving. So I was out walking my dog listening to it, and I think I laughed out loud because I thought, of course. So hopefully it's not too similar. But I think my regret is that too often in my adult life, I've sat back and let things happen to me, or let circumstances control the trajectory of my life rather than follow my passions and dreams. And I think what's sad about that is when I look back at being a teenager and, in my very early 20s, I wasn't like this. I took these risks. I put myself out there all the time. I took on challenges. I mean, I moved across the world, for goodness sake. And then somehow that disappeared, and I regret that, because I think what happened is that then I followed a career path by default and need, because I needed to get a job, I needed to earn some money, rather than desire and passion. And I think from then on, you were living from, it was about living for your paycheck, or, well, not living, that's not what I mean, but you're then sort of trapped in a situation that is very hard to make steps to get out of. And I think doing something that I wasn't always so passionate about meant that I was looking for ways all the time to make it more fulfilling, which maybe led to situations where I was a bit out of my depth, and then lost some confidence. And I guess having cancer teaches you very much that life is way too short and precious to coast along and to go with the flow. I mean, if you're really happy, go with the flow for sure. But if you're not actually that happy, and I think that's where I was, but I was floating along, coasting through the life that I had sort of fallen into. And I don't want to ever do that again. Right. So I think what I've learned is that sometimes it's more important to step back, take a step back as well, earn less, take chances, and risks that you would have done when you were younger. Put aside, there's ways around everything, and don't get stuck in a rut like that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm just wondering, I know you've had enough on your plate already, Suze, but did sort of like the pandemic lockdown, I know it wasn't exactly a furlough situation, but did that period of time give you a little bit of extra contemplation time, like it has for lots of other people as well?
Yeah, I secretly quite enjoyed lockdown. I mean, I was sort of lucky. Well, no, that's not the right phrase. My chemo coincided with lockdown fairly closely. So it meant I was free from those dilemmas of bowing out of things all the time because I wasn't feeling very well, because we just weren't able to see everyone. So I was able to really focus in on my recovery and my repair between each cycle, because, you get hit with the drugs and then you get a week to recover before you're, to strengthen and get hit by them again. Right. And I had to be really selfish with that time and really prioritize how I wanted to spend it, which sometimes was hard because people want to see you and they love you and care for you. And I didn't always want to see people. I kind of just wanted to stay in my little zone of repairing, recovering, getting strong, facing it again, putting my head down, dealing with the side effects, starting all over again. And I did really struggle with feeling guilty about not actually wanting to see people. So the lockdown really took that element away from me. And it took me a while to feel safe to come out of it, not just because of the risk of infection, but because I then had to let go of some of that selfish me time that I had.
Yes. Yeah.
I was, I had quite a strict routine, not strict routine, that's not right, a really nice routine with some, for myself. And I was languishing in that nice selfish time.
Yeah. It was weird. While you were talking, I don't know why, well, I do know, I was getting an image of a caterpillar. And I was thinking, why am I getting an image of a caterpillar? And I thought, because I'm thinking of cocooned, that's the word that kept coming up. And I was thinking that you were able to, and a lot of us were, we felt a bit like that, didn't we?
Absolutely.
I know I was working upstairs on Zoom and I was in school a bit, but there was this lovely feeling that it was me and Enid and Ruby and we were in this little cocoon together. And like you, we felt that there were a number of positives.
Yes,
yeah.
to that.
I mean, obviously we know it's not a great thing, but yeah, there were some really nice ways of using that time, weren't there? And it was weirdly quite special in some ways.
Yeah.
We don't get it very often, do we, to be able to insulate ourselves. I can really understand that.
Yeah, totally.
So, Suze, how can our listeners find you online, and how can they follow your progress and adventures and information, etc.?
So I can be found via my blog, letstalkaboutpoo.com, all one word. And I'm just about today, I'm hopefully going to publish another post part 16 of my journey. And you can subscribe. So if you go on there, you can subscribe, and then you'll get a little email saying that I've written something else and you can read it. I'm also in Instagram, and my Instagram handle is also Let's Talk About Poo. So if you want to see puppies and some exercising and some reflections on, like I'm not very graceful, I'll put that out there. So I will post the odd video of me being very ungraceful doing some sort of exercise on screen.
Trust me, you'll be impressed.
Yes.
But also just to prove that you don't have to be Iron Woman.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
And some reflections on my cancer roller coaster, as I like to call it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Suze. I think a lot of people will be logging on and reading and being inspired and informed by that. Thank you so much.
That'd be great.
So, Suze, this is one of my favourite questions, and because all the answers are very different. But if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
Okay, I thought really hard about this one because I've learnt so much this year. I think I probably learnt more about myself and now and us as humans than I maybe ever. And my billboard would be just stop and listen. And my reason is that because we as humans and society judge people really quickly all the time. We're making judgments about other people. And one of my very first true stories was about my reaction to people's reactions to my cancer diagnosis. And I felt that too often people were comparing my story to other people's stories, and they were trying to fix things or trying to make me feel better. And that's not what I needed. I just needed people to allow me to feel petrified and scared. And so I think it's just important that we as society, we step outside our own experiences and try a bit harder to understand where other people are coming from and what's happened in their lives. And we too often compare our crises. We're always saying, oh, well, I've had this to deal with, but they've only had that to deal with, and they're acting like this is this massive thing. But we can't compare crises. We all deal with our crises differently, and we should just step back and go, well, that's how they're feeling about that crisis. I don't have to fix their crisis. I can just help them respond in a way that feels natural to them. And I think in the age of social media as well, we fall out with people almost because we react too quickly. We don't stop and listen to what they're actually saying. Yeah. And I think, because we hate to be criticized, we react defensively, even though we might actually be in the wrong, or we might have maybe worded things in not the most eloquent way. And I think it's all human nature, but if we just listened more, and stepped back before we made a response, and tried to see the world from the viewpoint of other people, I think it would be a much better place to be.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's so funny that you've said that, because we were talking about exactly that this morning. And we were saying that, just from a situation that we're kind of in, and we were saying that actually, we wanted people to do less. We weren't asking them to do something. We were asking them to not do something. And the not do something was not to bring judgment to the situation. It was actually just to be heard, which would have felt validating. So we were saying, that's interesting, isn't it? But then I'm sure we've been in the same position where we've tried to offer, helpful advice, which has been quite annoying to other people. But it's just such a helpful reminder. Yeah. That's interesting. Thanks, Suze. So thinking about you've had I hate to use the word journey, but you have had quite an intense journey over the last year, which you weren't expecting. And I wonder, what do you feel most grateful for?
I feel very grateful for my childhood. I think I had a really happy childhood, a rich childhood. And when I say rich, I mean in terms of experiences and opportunities and reading books and having really cool camping holidays. We didn't go overseas or anything like that, but we had some really full, fascinating holidays and trips and experiences at home. I had a lot of love in my childhood, and I think I'm especially grateful for that because both my parents had a more challenging childhood than me. I don't think my mum had a lot of love in her childhood. I think my dad's childhood, he obviously they both lost their fathers at 14. My dad, a lot of his childhood was around my grandfather's bowel cancer. With my mum, her dad, she grew up with an alcoholic father who she remembers being, crossing across the street because she was embarrassed if he saw her and recognized her and spoke to her in front of other people. My gran was obviously not always the easiest woman. And I'm really grateful to my parents for the way that they were able to give us probably something different to what they experienced. I mean, I think my dad had some really happy memories, but also he had a lot of challenges there as well. And I feel really, really lucky that they were able to do that for us, because it's not always easy when you haven't had that same experience to draw on. So they kind of decided, or whether they decided or it just happened, not to repeat that, to do something completely different. Did you? So where did you actually grow up, Suze? What kind of, was it like rural, or you in the city, or? I was in the suburbs, but we did spend a lot of time on my grandma's farm.
Nice.
By that stage, it was my uncle. My uncle had taken over, but she was still a very, probably much to my uncle's dismay, very much an important driving force in the management of the farm. And my dad was a biologist, is a retired biologist. So we spent a lot of time camping because he was doing field work. So we spent a lot of time in the bush, even though we were basically suburban kids.
Oh, that's interesting, because I often noticed that how much you seem to love the outdoors. You always, your pictures are, you give us a lot of good tips about great places to go in Norfolk, because it's always like, wow, that looks so beautiful. I wonder where you are. And actually where you live is quite near a lovely, even though it's in the city, it's near the lovely river. And
I was just thinking when you were talking about being, and this is the sheep farm we're talking about, isn't it? Where that your grandmother was running. I was just thinking that when I think of sheep farms, I think of Yorkshire and a smaller, but we're talking about Australia here, aren't we? And we're not talking about small sheep farms. We're talking about pretty big sheep farms, because sheep farming is a big industry over there, isn't it? So, I mean, when I've got a visual of sheep farms, I've got like a few sheep in a field, but we're not talking about that, are we? We're talking about a rather sizable concern, yeah. Yeah,
although they're not in comparison to the big sort of cattle stations. There are some farms in Australia where mostly, I think it's mostly cattle, where they actually have to use helicopters to manage their stock. Wow. So we weren't on. They weren't on that. My family wasn't on that scale, but it was a big enough farm to be split into 4, and for each daughter to inherit a section of the farm.
Wow.
And what's
amazing.
And it's quite, I think they've managed to keep at least 2 of those sections in the family. Or
amazing.
My cousin Kate and her partner have taken over part of the farm, which I think must be a nice nice thing for my uncle, because it must be, you know, you can't sort of shove your children in any direction, can you? But it must be, it's nice as an outsider to know it's staying in the family, even though even though I've not taken any responsibility for that.
That is very interesting, though, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of leads us into our final question, which talks about the lessons you've learned in your life, but I kind of want to add to that as well, because this is your story and this is your conversation, and you know, I would love you to just you know, end our program by just talking perhaps about the lessons you've learned, but anything else that you think would be beneficial to any of our listeners listening out there, looking for help or looking for some words of inspiration. So I'm just going to leave the floor open. No pressure. You. No pressure at all. No pressure, Sus. But you know, just
do your thing.
Just do your thing, and just yeah.
So I've learned a lot of lessons in life, and there's lots of different, I guess, avenues I could take this question. I think the one I'm going to go with was sort of triggered by something you guys shared, I think, on your Instagram, which was about you're not always going to be everybody's cup of tea, and that's okay. And that's especially important for me at the moment, because I'm a friend of mine's having a really difficult time with maybe a sort of toxic friendship, and it's that sort of idea has come to me again, and I'll link it back to cancer eventually as well, because everything can link back to cancer now. But yeah, and I think it's that idea that what I have learnt is that you definitely can't make people like you, and it is okay that you're not everyone's cup of tea. But I did struggle with this for many, many years, and it led to some periods where I had very low self-esteem and low self-worth. And I think that also made me a target for bullies a few times. So trying to please someone who will never be pleased by you makes you incredibly vulnerable to this kind of experience, because there are sadly people out there who will take some sort of pleasure in knowing that you're trying to please them, and knowing that, well, they might not even know that they're doing it, but whatever you do will never be good enough, because they've decided that they don't like you for some reason. And I struggled with this really quite a lot, and I was talking to my friend about it just this morning, because I said that's my biggest thing that I've learned is to step back and go, actually, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to make you like me. I can't make you like me. It's possibly not even my fault, but I used to really care. I used to really struggle. I couldn't bear it if I thought somebody thought ill of me or had misinterpreted something that I said, or my intentions, or one of my actions, and I'd try and fix it, and then I'd inherently make it worse, and then I'd come across as being quite vulnerable and therefore an easy target. And it led to maybe this feeling sometimes that I wasn't very likable, you know, let alone that someone could love me. But cancer made me realize that I was really loved, because everybody rallied around me, and it made me see how many amazing friends I have. And I've moved around a lot in my life, on different metaphors as well as physical planes. But I changed schools. I went away to university in another city, which isn't so easy in Australia because Australia's quite big. And we don't have the same sort of culture of going away to study and coming home for the holidays. That doesn't. If you go away to study in Australia, you generally stay there. It's not that.
Gosh, wow.
So here, a lot of people go away and come back and maintain their friendship groups because everyone comes back for the holidays, where that's not the same. And then I moved to the other side of the world. So I don't have those long-term, decades-old friendship groups that lots of people have. You know, people that they've grown up with or went to school with. I mean, I am in touch with people from all the different stages of my life. But when you're then surrounded by people who do have those really long-term friendship groups, and although you're invited to be part of them, it's always it's easy to sometimes feel like an outsider still. And so cancer has taught me that even though I had all those feelings, which probably, fed into my low self-esteem at times, even though it's, that fact and fiction, it's probably not true. It's just what's going on in my head. But your head is a very powerful place, isn't it?
Sure. Definitely.
Definitely.
But cancer really made me see how loved that I was, and that I was important to these to people, even though I may not be a big fixture in their everyday lives, or even though I may not have been a picture of their part of their lives for decades and decades, that I was still loved. And so that makes you really think, actually, there is no time to worry about people who you're not their cup of tea, and vice versa. They're probably not yours either. So, stick with your flavours.
That's really good. That's lovely. I'm going to use that.
It's so important, isn't it? That was a groundbreaking thing for me as well, Susan. I came to that conclusion during counselling training. Somebody once said to me, I don't know if they used the word people pleaser, but it was along those lines. And I thought, I was initially defensive around that, and then I thought, yeah, I'm like the original people pleaser. And then I noticed people interacting in ways that were, they would disagree with each other. They would not particularly, and they weren't that bothered. And I was like, oh my God, but it opened my mind up to that being a possibility, to it not being the end of the world. If somebody didn't like me or didn't agree with me, that I didn't have to appease them. That's huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so freeing.
It is freeing.
Yeah. And like you say, leaves you with energy and space for the people that do want to engage with. And also, as you say, sometimes it's nothing to really do with you. Sometimes we bring things out in people that they can't explain, and vice versa. So, wow, that was really inspiring to hear you say that. And it's been incredible to talk to you, Suze. It's been so moving and so fascinating, and above all, inspiring. And I hope everybody's going to go and check out your... I always say check you out, and it sounds really weird.
Hey.
Check out Suze. She's very, very cute. Yeah, she is very cute. Yeah. So
I sometimes wear very short shorts. But that's only because it's very hot. But it won't be so hot anymore. So you've missed out, guys.
Of course it is, Suze. Yeah.
People.
So check out Suze in her shorts.
Suze,
on Let's Talk About Poo on Instagram and on her blog. Suze, it's been wonderful to speak to you. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Suze. And hopefully we'll get the chance to speak again. It's been very, very inspiring. And thank you for your...
And we're thinking of you, and we're with you on your onward journey.
With your journey.
Everything
absolutely.
crossed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suze.